A number of issues, policies, and attitudes have direct effects on women's lives in and out of the workplace. Stephen David, Program Director or Program Associate of the ACLU of Ohio, will discuss equal pay. Steve has a bachelor's in women's, gender, and sexuality studies and a master's in social work with a concentration in community and social justice from The Ohio State University. Steve will document causes and contributing factors involved in pay differences based on gender. Steve will also explain the legislative history attempting to promote equal pay. Finally, in order to promote equitable economic opportunities, Steve will present work being done by the ACLU on this issue and offer some potential action for participants. So let's give a warm welcome to Stephen David.
Cool, thanks for having me, folks. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. And Derek, thanks for the introduction. So what would you all do with $440,000? That could be a house, a college education for your kids, a more secure retirement, perhaps a single dinner at a major political fundraiser, or perhaps an enduring bequest to the humanist community of Central Ohio. But whatever you would do with that $440,000, that is the average amount less that you will earn as a woman over the course of your working career than your comparable male counterpart. So, as Derek said, I'm going to dig into this, how that happens, what's being done about it, and what it might mean in the larger context of some of the politics of gender that we see in our country. But first, I kind of wanted to say a little bit about what it is that we do at the ACLU. I know that we have a couple awesome, diehard lifetime members here, which is always great to hear about. But can I just get a show of hands of folks who kind of have an idea of what the ACLU does, have heard about our organization? Okay, cool. So that's a lot more than usual. When I first started this job, my parents took me out to dinner after I was up in Cleveland for our orientation. And my dad asked me, he's like, so that was originally founded as a communist organization, right? And my mom was like, well, you guys just take down Jesus pictures from public schools. And that was the extent of which they were familiar with the work that we do. So we do things other than that. First of all, we're not a communist organization. That rumor started because the founding of the ACLU was during the First World War, when we were speaking out against people whose dissident political beliefs were landing them in some hot water with the federal government. So we're often affiliated with either the radical left or special interest politics. But we are a nonpartisan organization. We work on issues rather than endorsing political candidates or parties. And we are completely membership-based, and all of the work that we do comes from the donations of our members and private donors, so we get no government funding or anything like that. The things that we work on generally are, we're doing a lot of stuff on voting rights right now. We have a lawsuit. We're suing the Secretary of State right now and the Ohio General Assembly over the cuts to early voting that they passed. And we actually have a day in court on Monday trying to reinstate Golden Week, which was the week that you could register and vote the same week, and some of those early voting periods that we think are crucial, especially for people of color, to access political participation. We do a lot on criminal justice reform, LGBT issues. We've done a lot of stuff on free speech over the years. We've defended really unpopular groups like the KKK, because we think that the answer to speech you don't like is more speech rather than less. And we also do a lot of things around privacy, which has landed us some interesting friends in the State House. A lot of our Tea Party colleagues are the best folks working on privacy things. So it allows us the opportunity to work with folks across the political spectrum to work on issues around civil liberties and personal freedoms, and kind of to work on those things where usually we would be seen as antagonistic to these other viewpoints. So, one thing that we have been taking up the ACLU, especially the past couple months ago when this issue was in the national legislature was this issue of equal pay and paycheck fairness. So why is equal pay an issue, and like how is it that this happens? That, you know, this number that I threw out before of $440,000 over the course of your working career. So 40% of U.S. households are have a woman as the sole or primary breadwinner, the sole or primary source of income, and 2/3 of households have a woman as a co-earner or the sole earner. So we're talking about a large proportion of the population that this pay disparity is affecting. And according to census data compiled in 2012, for every dollar the average man earns, his female counterpart will earn 77 cents. So 77 cents on the dollar is your average wage earner, all women and men in the United States. So for the median earner, to take out some of those outliers, the median woman earner earns $11,000 less per year than the median male earner. So at the very middle, the extremes taken out, you're talking $11,000 less per year in your pocket than your male counterpart. These numbers, as I imagine many of you would not be surprised to know, are exacerbated by race. African American women earn only 64 cents on the dollar for the dollar every white man earns, and Latina women earn 54 cents on the dollar compared to their white male counterparts. So you're talking between $18,000 and $23,000 a year in annual income that those families aren't bringing in. Now, these numbers have actually increased 17 cents on the dollar since 1963 when the first Equal Pay Act was passed. But over the course of the past 12 years, since 2002, that number has not budged, and it has stayed stagnant. So we'll kind of talk about some of the legislative things that have been proposed to deal with that and why it is that this remains such a persistent problem. So when we see this 77 cents on the dollar, the logical question asks, well, like, how is this happening? Because, a lot of us think, like, I would get hired into a job and a woman would get hired into technically the same job as me, and, that the company would have policies where they would pay us the same. So there's a number of reasons how this actually operates. There are women getting paid less for the same job, women being segregated into lower wage jobs, retaliation against workers for discussing their pay reductions due to pregnancy and caregiving, and straight up wage theft. So I'll kind of go through each of these and kind of lay out how it is that we actually get to this number of these pay disparities. So the first one, less pay for doing the same job. Bloomberg Business Week in 2000, they compiled census data from 2010 and looked at 265 major occupations in the United States, covering 38,000 workers. And of these 265 major occupations, the only one where women earned more than their male colleagues was personal care service workers. So that includes things like maids and shoe shiners. So if you were a shoe shiner, that is your best chance of actually earning more than your male colleague. You earned $1.02 to his dollar. But for all other occupations across sectors, across jobs, that's doctors, lawyers, financial sector people, women in the same kind of jobs were earning less than their male counterparts. So how does this happen? How does it happen that women are getting paid less for these jobs? Well, social science has some interesting examples to point us to in that regard. In 2000, an article was published in the American Economics Review that looked at the number of women who got jobs in the 8 major symphony orchestras in the United States, and they looked at the rosters over time and the documents from the hiring process, and they found that in every single one of these orchestras, once a blind audition process was put in place, the number of women increased in the orchestra. Blind auditions were instituted because there was a lot of nepotism going on with directors hand-picking the people that they wanted, so they started having performers perform behind screens, and little do you know it, once those procedures were put in place, more women started to be represented in these orchestras. And the amount of that increase is not explained by like a comparable increase in women auditioning. Like, whereas there were more women auditioning it didn't account for the amount of raise that we saw once you could no longer see who the performer was, and you were evaluating based on the sound of their music. And then in 2012, the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences in the United States, they did a randomized double-blind study of 127 science faculty from research-intensive universities. So what they did in this study was they gave faculty an application for a lab manager position. And the lab manager is like a pretty sought-after graduate position. It will kind of like put you on the fast track to either an academic career or, like a better job prospects, more mentorship like within your science field. And so these 127 faculty were given these lab manager applications. They were all identical applications, except for half of them were John, science student, and half were Jennifer, science student. And across the board, both male and female faculty evaluated this identical female application as less hireable and offered her a lower starting salary than they did these male applicants. So these are not, like women getting paid less for these jobs. It's not, in all cases intentional sexism or people out there to really like get their female counterparts. These are what I think has been shown by these studies to be very deep-seated, unconscious ways that people are biasing female applicants without even knowing it. And so that's how we end up with this situation where women are earning 77 cents on the dollar of their male counterparts. So some of the other reasons that we see, job segregation, just basic sex role stereotypes, as Jeff brought up, of social work being a female-dominated profession, and we see the battle that goes on amongst social workers trying to advocate for ourselves and for better wages. I'm actually a social worker as well, so I was glad that was raised here. But yeah, so sex role stereotypes have women in lower paid careers and professions. They also make up 2/3 of minimum wage workers in this country. So they are not only being paid less for the same job, but also segregated into lower jobs with lower compensation. Retaliation against workers for discussing their pay. A lot of major employers, they either explicitly prohibit or actively discourage their employees from discussing their pay. A lot of times there are explicit things in your employment contract that you cannot discuss pay with your colleagues, which makes it very difficult to know if you're being discriminated against for your wages and what your other coworkers are earning. Pay reductions due to pregnancy and caregiving responsibilities. This is something that we see with, I said that these pay inequalities go across all job categories, and if you look at employees like, if you look at lawyers, for instance, or tenure track faculty, where you're often, on like a tight timeline where, if you're going to make partner, you're going to get tenure. They have, like 7 years and these things where like you start your career and you have to like make it happen then if you're really going to get into these upper echelons. Those kind of timelines can often penalize women for if they choose to take time off for child rearing during those years when it would be the critical times to advance their career. And then there's also just straight up wage theft. Minimum wage violations they're much more common amongst female employees than male employees, especially if we look at undocumented workers. 47% of undocumented female workers report wage violations by their employers compared to only 25% of male undocumented workers. So when it comes down to if your employer is really going to just like straight up like not follow the law, if you're a woman, you are much more likely to be subjected to that. So what has been done about this? What have we? Obviously, has been an issue for a long time since women have entered the workforce. We've seen these kind of pay disparities. So in 1963, the first Equal Pay Act was passed, signed into law by President John Kennedy. And when he signed the law, he said that this act affirms our commitment that when women enter the labor force, they will find equity in their pay envelope. However, since this law has been passed, it has been subject to a lot of loopholes built into it, has lacked the ability to really close the wage gap because of a lack of enforcement tools. And whereas it has made progress raising the pay equity from 60 cents on the dollar to 77 cents from 1963 to 2002. As I mentioned, this gap has stalled since 2002 and moved up or down a percentage point over the past 12 years, and we're still at that 77 cents on the dollar figure, despite the Equal Pay Act that is, federal law. The most recent law passed to try and remedy some of these inequities was in 2009. The Lilly Ledbetter Act was the first piece of legislation signed into law by President Obama. So this law was named for an Alabama woman who, at the end of her 19-year career as a supervisor for the Goodyear Tire Company, she found that she had been paid less than her male colleagues who were retiring with her. She was bringing in around like $3,800 a month, and found that her male colleagues with equal amounts of seniority were making $4,800 to $5,200 a month. So she sued, claiming pay discrimination, saying that there were like these step raises in place and everything, and that she had been discriminated against and not received commensurate salary compared to her male colleagues. And in her initial case, a jury they sided with her, and they found Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company guilty of pay discrimination. Obviously, as you would expect, a large company like that decided to, they appealed, and this case eventually went up to the Supreme Court. And in 2007, in Ledbetter versus Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company, they decided in a 5-4 decision that she was not entitled to this pay compensation because she was not within the 180-day statute of limitation from when she first learned about her pay discrimination. And it stated that within this 180 days, like of the first time they discriminated against her, being like that, the paycheck that she received where she was earning less, that she was not within that statute of limitations, and they threw her case out. So Congress tried to pass a law in 2008 to remedy this. However, it was threatened with a veto by the Bush White House, saying that it would encourage lawsuits, and argued that employees could delay filing their claims in hopes of reaping bigger rewards. However, after the election in 2008, with a Democratic Congress and a new Democratic president, Barack Obama signs his first piece of legislation, which reinstates that 6-month statute of limitation at each paycheck. So it's not the first instance of discrimination, but every time you get paid, that renews the statute of limitation that would allow you to sue for potential wage discrimination based on gender. So the effect of this law provides access to the courts for pursuing claims, but it does not necessarily mandate changes by businesses. So what has so in order to kind of remedy the lack of enforcement tools in the 63 Equal Pay Act, the Paycheck Fairness Act has been proposed by Senate Democrats in the year 2010, 2012, and 2014. In April of 2014, it was defeated by a Senate filibuster for the third time. This bill would do things like require that employers demonstrate wage differences between men and women are based on essential job functions or business justifications rather than sex. They prohibit retaliation for discussing wages. They would ensure that women have the same remedies that people claiming discrimination based on national origin or race have when claiming discrimination. They authorize training for equal opportunity employment staff to better identify and handle wage disparities, and it would require technical assistance. It would require the Department of Labor to provide technical assistance to employers so that they would know how to deal with these potential claims when they come up. So, as I said, in April 9th of 2014, it was defeated by Senate filibuster for the third time. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell said that it would simply line the pockets of trial lawyers. So was his justification for not going with some of these additional protections for women. We at the ACLU had worked a great deal on trying to get this Paycheck Fairness Act passed. We do a lot of legislative lobbying and working with on both the national and state level to try and get these kind of legislation to get traction. However, the Paycheck Fairness Act was, did not make it out of the Senate, but we were able to, we did a lot of advocacy directed directly at President Barack Obama, and in April, after the Paycheck Fairness Act fell through, he did issue an executive order that bans retaliation against employees for federal contractors disclosing or inquiring about wages, and issued a presidential memorandum instructing the Department of Labor to establish new regulations to have federal contractors submit data so that we can better track what's going on, at least for federal employees. So that is where things stand legislatively. Again, it is the Paycheck Fairness has been brought up multiple times. The current state of political affairs has made it very unpopular because of beliefs around putting too much hands on small businesses and these kind of concerns that we see in people that advocate for more quote unquote free market ideology. So at the ACLU, we tend to view an issue like paycheck fairness in the context of what might be termed larger control over women's social and economic lives. So I mentioned pregnancy discrimination. In July 14th, the EEOC, which is the Equal Opportunity Employment Commission, they issued, for the first time in a long time, comprehensive guidelines for employers with pregnant workers, stating things that they must give pregnant workers reasonable accommodations like light duty, the same as people who would claim other restrictions under the Americans with Disabilities Act, that they cannot force pregnant workers to take leave, and that discrimination against breastfeeding workers is covered under the Pregnant Workers Discrimination Act. We also do kind of situate some of these things around pay within the context of reproductive autonomy. We, for a long time, have been advocates for for reproductive freedom for women and their ability to make their own healthcare decisions. This was one reason why we were deeply disturbed by the ruling in the recent Hobby Lobby case. We see Hobby Lobby as the first time that that the courts decided that religion could be imposed on another person to override that person's legal rights. And it raises these what we see as troubling questions of to what extent are some legal rights in jeopardy because people have religious objections to those legal rights. And it seems that in a lot of cases it may be because of your influence in certain other arenas that will make your religious objections carry weight or not. In addition, I don't know if any of you have seen, but the last abortion clinic in Toledo is currently closed because it's not have admitting privileges to a local hospital. They are appealing that ruling, whether or not a hospital in Michigan constitutes a local hospital. But laws that have been passed in Ohio and around the country that limit women's access to different types of reproductive health care, we see as somewhat intertwined with these other things like wage disparities and pregnancy discrimination. One other thing that I want to raise real quickly, I will admit that I have not read her book, but Sheryl Sandberg's book, Lean In, was very popular recently and discussed some of these instances of women needing to learn how to negotiate like a man and assert yourself in the workplace, and that there was some kind of socialization aspects that women don't have the confidence that men have had in the workplace to negotiate for these higher wages, and that's partially explaining these wage disparities. As someone who was brought up who studied feminism in college, I don't find the argument that that socialization has an effect on our ability to negotiate in the workplace. I don't find that all that groundbreaking, and see it as being something that could very, very well influence what's going on if for a long time you are raised to not make waves and be good and sit back and be quiet. I can see that very much affecting your ability to advocate for yourself in the marketplace. But we can have a discussion about that later if we want. So what are some things that we can do about this? The first thing that I would say is to know your own rights. Know the law and know your employer's policies. If in your workplace, if your employer does not have something that explicitly prohibits discussing your wages, perhaps you should be the one to raise that conversation with your fellow coworkers. Those are often difficult and awkward conversations, But in terms of if you're being paid a salary that is equitable to your colleagues and coworkers, a lot of times that can't happen unless someone is willing to speak up and have that conversation. So tell your friends to know their rights as well and know what their employer's practices are, because as was the case with Lily Ledbetter, it was not until she had retired and left work that she had found out that for all these years she was being paid less than her male counterparts with equal seniority. And so so if you know your rights and you know the law, I would encourage you to advocate for yourself in your job and with your employer. A lot of us are in situations where you have to be your best. You have to be your own personal advocate, which is something that my education in social work has taught me. That if we don't advocate for ourselves, a lot of times no one else will. So if those of us who find ourselves in things like the caring professions and doing work that I consider very important, like direct service work, a lot of times it is on us to demonstrate to our employers and to funders and lawmakers that the work that we do is valuable and is worth being compensated for. And then you should also, if you have the opportunity to, you should advocate for others. You should tell your friends and colleagues about things that are going on. Have these difficult conversations with folks and be willing to open up space to talk about wages and wage disparities. And then, because this is something that we do a lot of work on when the opportunities arise, I would also encourage all of you to join the ACLU. All the work that we do happens because of our members and their generous donations. So none of the advocacy that we do on the range of topics that we address would be possible without folks writing their first check to us and making those contributions. So those are the people that make these kind of things happen. Those conclude my prepared remarks, and I would love to take any questions from you folks or have a discussion about these things. So.